Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Terry Fralich's 1985 Asian Journey, Part 4. This was originally the first third of Zook Family Memories Collection, or ZFMC number 19, published on May 20th, 1989. And the author, Terry, and his father Harold, my father's cousin, were hiking in the Himalaya mountains of Nepal. And the highest mountains in the world, and they were with a group of Americans, and they were being helped by Nepalese. So they had a real adventure. May 6, 1985. Continued. Lunch on the terraces of an unnamed village. For some reason, this village doesn't seem to be on the map, although it is certainly large enough to be noted. Everyone seemed to be out in the fields as we approached. But as we arrived at our lunch spot, we had drawn the usual crowd. It was a beautiful sunny day with wonderful views looking out from the terraces. The group all seemed to be content to sit in the sun, catch up on journals, read, and leisurely wait until lunch was ready. Yesterday was not a very eventful day. We descended all morning, and I had considerable trouble with my knee. The path was often rocky, wet, and covered with leaves, a terrible combination for sound footing. As a result, I got my leg turned the wrong way several times and aggravated my damaged cartilage. By lunch, I was hurting and feeling low. A bit more down after lunch, and then we headed up the ridge on the other side of the valley. It was one of those steep trails that hugs the side of the mountain, but I didn't mind. I seemed to be able to get into a trance with the long climbs and not notice anything but the steady upward movement. The only notable event yesterday happened mid-afternoon. We were just entering a small village, and I was fairly near the front of the group. We rounded a corner and faced a large male buffalo in the livestock area of a house. We must have startled it. It did 3 quick turns after its tail, broke out of its pen, and charged onto the trail right toward Rita, Kathy, and me. Ram jumped in front of Kathy, shouting and waving his arms. The buffalo turned on the trail and headed for David and Paul just a few feet in front. Both jumped off the trail, and the angry animal ran by, moving off the path and climbing up terrace after terrace. We quickly filed out of the village as Ram stayed behind to discuss the incident with the owner. Apparently, the animal was finally caught and brought quietly back home. The rest of the afternoon was uneventful. We camped on terraces above a small village, had our usual rain around dinner time, 7 out of 8 days, and woke to beautiful views of Manaslu, the 4th or 5th highest peak in the world, and its neighbor, Himil Chuli. Both are over 26,000 feet, and they provided an inspiring skyline as we headed out for the morning. May 8th, Michael and Seth's birthday, about a day and a half's walk from Gorkha and the end of our trek. The day before yesterday was one of the most difficult on the trek for many of us. We started a long down after lunch. It wasn't excessively steep, but there were a lot of rocks. Before long, my knee was feeling a sharp pain with every down step. Dad and I were walking with Mingma, and we were a bit behind everyone else. My knee was hurting enough that I felt I should go ahead to get in as soon as possible and get off my knee. Little did I know what lay ahead. About a half an hour after I left Dad with Mingma, the path around the terraces which I had been following turned sharply downhill and through the woods. It was the kind of trail that has steep down steps and frequently crossed long rock slabs. Just as I started down, the sky bellowed with thunder, and the rain turned the hillside into mud and slippery rock. I struggled to get my rain gear over my pack, and then set my mind to keeping my bad leg to the side of the slope, and do sort of a side step slip down to the bridge across the Buri Gandaki that awaited me at the bottom. I fell once, but muddy hands were the only result. After an hour or so on the descent, I caught Lydia, Karen, and David. Ram was waiting at one point to make sure everyone made it up a short but sheer rock face before the last slide down to the bridge. I scrambled up the rock and slid the last few hundred yards to the bridge. What a relief. It was a great ride across, swaying but secure, or so it felt. On the other side were huge marijuana patches along the path. There was so much that it gave off a fresh green smell of pot. The knee was still hurting, but I was determined to get into a race pace and get there quickly. Little did I know. The path followed the river like a roller coaster. Up and down long stone stairs, some so steep that they reminded me of the stone steps up the Mayan pyramids at Chichen Itza. My knee could not take the downward pressure, so I started going down backwards, looking under my arm and steadying my backward steps with my stick. On and on. I passed Dan and Gareth, who were both very fatigued, past some Nepalis and through some corn terraces. Every corner had to show camp, but it didn't. All in all, it was another 2 hours from the bridge when I finally found the last bend. There was a rushing stream there, forming clear pools. I immediately tore off my clothes and was in the water. Wonderful. Thoughts of Dad had been in my mind constantly during the afternoon. The steep downhill slide in the rain, the sharp rock climb, the seemingly endless up and down after the bridge. As soon as I had finished washing and had found my extra pair of shoes, I headed back on the trail. Without a pack and refreshed, I was moving fast, despite my knee. Each step brought me more emotion about Dad. Finally, after 25 minutes of backtracking, I saw Dad coming down a long flight of stones. I gave out a yell. He was relieved to see me, but too fatigued for much of a response. We walked slowly back together, Dad gaining strength and spirit as we went. When we reached camp, I led him directly to the pool where I had bathed, got him a towel and a cup of hot tea, and sat with him while he soaked. It was 6 o'clock. Dad had been on the trail over 9 hours and was definitely happy to be home for the night. May 9th. It's hard to believe we're almost there. The last 2 days have been a real grind. The trails have not been difficult, relatively speaking, but at this stage of the trip and following the long day around the bridge, bodies seem to be breaking down. After all, we've been out 17 days, and many of us have not had a single full rest day. The day after the bridge, Dad and I both had down days, no energy, and slightly off digestive systems. We lagged behind all morning, refreshed at a pool under a beautiful waterfall at lunch, and dragged ourselves through a long afternoon. A good night's sleep made a huge difference, and we started the morning with fresh energy. We were still following the Buri Gandaki, but in contrast to the day before, we were basically staying on level ground, just slightly above the river. The water rushed quickly by us, and fantasies of being on a raft repeatedly took me down the current. It was quickly becoming obvious that we were now closer to roads and larger settlements. The houses along the trail were larger, often 3 stories, and sometimes they were even mortared, and there was an increasing flow of traffic passing us in both directions. Shortly after lunch, we reached Aragat Bazaar, the first settlement since we started that showed all the evidences of being within easy range of trade routes. There were shops with a variety of goods instead of just biscuits, hard candies, and a few other limited items we had seen in 1 or 2 towns before. There was even a rudimentary bank branch. Best of all, there was a tea house with mildly cold soft drinks. In 15 minutes, 10 of us virtually inhaled about 50 bottles of orange Fanta and Limu. We had a quick swim in the river and then launched into the afternoon. The first hour was a pleasant walk along rice paddies, but as the afternoon wore on, the sun grew increasingly strong and the temperatures reached the low 90s. Now we were walking up a rocky stream bed, and the footing was becoming tough. At one point, we stopped at a tea house. It was a shadeless spot, and the sun was scorching. There was no suitable water around, so I bought some tea and emptied it into my water bottle for later. The Sherpas and kitchen boys that stopped with us each had several glasses of chung, a strong local alcoholic drink. It seemed like an odd choice for a long hike in the hot sun, but I'd long since learned to expect the unexpected from our Nepali staff. The group had strung out quite a bit with the heat, and Dad wasn't at the tea house by the time I was ready to leave. He was in good hands with Dawa, though, and I decided to go on. The stream bed twisted and turned amid high banks on both sides. I was walking by myself and watching carefully for the prints of the small group ahead of me. On and on. I wanted to be there now, get to camp, and get off my screaming feet. The day's walk, as the accumulation of 17 days on the trail, took on the feeling of the last several miles of a marathon. No particular joy in walking now or in the beauty around me. The object was just to get there. I saw Ram about 4 o'clock, and he seemed concerned. He knew the group had gone far enough, that it was very hot, but all the flat land was cultivated, and he was having difficulty finding a campsite. A little after 5 o'clock he discovered some unplanted terraces, and I followed him to our camp for the night. I collected my things, grabbed a towel, and walked 10 minutes back to the stream to wash and look for Dad, Harold Fralich. He was about 40 minutes behind me, walking along with Dawa, Mingma, Naimi, and Daddy, tired but in good spirits. I left him with soap and towel, soaking his feet in a pool, and went back to set up our tent. It had been a long day, but we had just one more to go, and I was sure that the last would be more relaxed. We got an early start this morning and immediately started through small villages and past frequent tea houses, now sharing the trail with streams of porters coming out of Gorkha. There was someone carrying everything: cloth goods, kerosene, yard-long sheets of tin roofing, lumber, all the items of manufacture that made it up the road from Kathmandu to Gorkha. We were used to having the trail basically to ourselves, but this rush-hour traffic added to the excitement of nearing Gorkha. Padam found this beautiful spot for lunch, as usual, and our spirits were high as we shared our last meal on the trail. May 12th, on the rooftop garden of the Tibetan guest house in Kathmandu, Nepal. We're back. Our 18 days on the trek are a memory, but one I can already see that will remain strong, vivid, and dramatic. The last afternoon was an easy one. Dad and I took our last few miles very leisurely, walking together, chatting, and enjoying the beauty of the mountains around us, and drawing in the final moments of the trek. We would both be glad to get to Gorkha, but there was no eagerness now. In fact, I could already feel the difficulty of letting go and moving on to another experience. By 2 o'clock, we had reached the temple above Gorkha. Dad sat and chatted with the Sherpas while I climbed the stairs to investigate. Then it was the last descent down long flights of stone steps, more than 1,200 in all, to the town. Dad and I wandered down the main street, found a bar with Dan, Gareth, and Pally, and again chugged a few orange Fantas and Lemus. We had made it. May 14th, Kathmandu Airport. Transitions. The departure from the trekking group and staff was an extended one. On our only night in Gorkha, we ate dinner with the Sherpas and porters, the only meal of the trip we had shared together. It felt good sitting around the tarp with everyone eating the same food, making rudimentary conversation and laughing. After dinner, Kirpa immediately got out his drum and the dancing began. Supa Singh, probably the oldest porter on the trek at about 42, led the way with his smooth, graceful steps, turns, and arm movements. As usual, the footing was a good deal less than ideal, but I kept my steps small and moved over the dirt clods on the terrace to the strong beat of Kirpa's drum. The stars came out overhead. A small boy listened and danced at the edge of the music several hundred yards away, and there was a wonderful feeling of communion with these people who had showed us so much strength, acceptance, and warmth during the trek. My stomach was slightly upset the next morning, possibly from the little bit of rakshi I drank during the celebration of the night before. We were on our rickety bus and heading toward Kathmandu by 6:30 with the staff singing the Nepali folk songs we had become familiar with. I slept most of the way, hoping to revive a bit before we arrived. It was drizzling when we reached Kathmandu. The porters brought us our duffels one last time, and we stood facing each other in the rain, everyone hesitant and looking sadly at the other, trying to find the words for a goodbye. Finally, we bowed, bid our last namaste, and shuffled off to our rooms in the hotel. The group, or parts of it, spent a fair amount of time together over the next few days. There was the Nawari farewell dinner with Ram and the Sherpas, Mingma, Dawa, and Kirpa, Saturday night. Shopping, sightseeing, and even some dancing. But the mood and tone was definitely different. Without the daily regimen of the trek, the necessity of sharing a common goal, and following the direction of Ram and Kern, the cohesiveness was gone, and various individuals had difficulty getting along with others. It was interesting to see how quickly the group dynamic changed. Dad and I kept a leisurely pace for the remainder of our stay. Our bodies seemed to demand it. I did find the reserves for 2 late nights of dancing, though. Boogieing my butt off to Bob Seger's Night in Kathmandu was a charge. On the first outing, I met a tall, beautiful black lady, Faith Dennis, from, where else, Los Angeles. Only danced with her once or twice and chatted briefly the first night, but spent the entire evening with her the next night. Parts of Faith's story reflected what one associates with travelers in Kathmandu. She started out with her husband some months ago, but they separated on difficult terms, and she had been basically hanging out in Nepal for a couple of months, picking up odd jobs of ill-defined variety along the way. She was doing some harder drugs than I would be interested in, but professed not to be that interested in them and gave no signs of being wasted. In fact, she was friendly, articulate, and sensitive. We danced until 1 o'clock and then wandered through the dark streets back to her room at the Guest House, right next to the Asia Hotel. Her roommate, Sherry, came with us. Sherry was one of those characters that you sometimes read about and wonder if they really exist. A woman in her early 40s, Australian, husky but not fat, tough-talking and genuinely tough-looking. Apparently, she had been kicking around the third world countries of Asia for almost 20 years. Her focus that night was decidedly Vietnam. She had somehow served as a gunner on a helicopter with the Australian forces and rambled non-stop to me about the war. The Australian forces had no supplies. It didn't matter anyway, because they'd rather kill with their knives to save bullets. The American Marines were all madmen. They left me up in the hills all the time because they knew they would fight with everybody and create havoc if they brought them down to the cities. Firing the guns in a helicopter ain't no big deal. You just pull up on those triggers and hold on like hell. In another place, at another time, it might have seemed preposterous. But sitting in the small room in the middle of the Kathmandu night, it sounded too detailed, too fully personal to be merely someone's imagination. I listened intently to Sherry, reliving my own emotions about the horror and tragedy of the Vietnam War, watching Faith's long, graceful body lying on the bed in front of me, and feeling like I was moving in and out of a dream. It was getting close to 3 o'clock a.m., and Sherry's words had started to turn into a long, continuous drone. Faith had offered to share her bed, which would have been very inviting had we been alone. But the thought of spending the rest of the night there, Faith and I in one bed and Sherry just a few feet away, did not seem appealing. I waited for an appropriate break in the monologue, said I had to be going, and walked down the 3 flights of stairs and the front gate. Our paths seemed to be crossing in Bangkok in June, and we expressed a hope that we would find each other again there. The streets of Thamel, the old section of Kathmandu, are totally dark in the middle of the night. The faint light of a new moon barely broke the darkness around me, but I found my way back to the Tibetan guest house, fell into bed, and drifted off with thoughts of my Kathmandu night. To be continued. So that concludes today's presentation. Terry Fralich's 1985 Asian Journey Part 4. Good luck to you with your efforts in family history, if this interests you. Finding, preserving, and sharing old letters, diaries, and photographs, and interviewing elderly relatives while they're alive. Thanks so much for watching. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History, with Peter J. Ray at peterjray.com. Thanks again for watching. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.